What about this guy? Is he taking care of you? Is there anything I need to talk to him about? We were talking earlier with some of the team. If you do not follow church life, you will know that, or you may not know, that healthy transitions do not happen in church life. The existing pastor, current pastor gets fired, leaves, something doesn't go well, the guy following doesn't measure up. So healthy transitions do not happen very much at all. And one of the things that I personally celebrate every Wednesday morning when I come in and hear the reports of Kairos is how healthy this transition has been and how well Chris has done. Although sometimes it does hurt my feelings, but mostly it's pretty good. A lot's changed since I was here. I have 3 granddaughters, 3 beautiful little girls, Mackenzie, Rowan, and Brooklyn. And everything on my credit card is now pink. Jeannie sees it as God's ultimate revenge on me. Because we had twin boys, and now we have 3 granddaughters, and so there's stuff going on in my house that I don't recognize, I don't know, and little girls are different than little boys. I love these people who say it's all nurture. There's no difference between boys and girls. You've never been around them. Mackenzie was picking at me something, and I looked at her and I said, "No, Mackenzie, stop." Oh, crushed her. She went crying over to her mother, and everybody in the room's going, "What did you do? What did you..." I'm sorry. Won't do that again. So we're having a lot of fun with that. My mom died July 14th. Which was the interesting thing. We've been having conversations because she was very healthy. There was no indication that we were going to be dealing with anything. And we got the call on that Saturday morning about 6 o'clock, go to the emergency room, do not come here, go to the emergency room. And we went there. As the good Lord would have it, her sisters were all in town for a visit, and so they were here. When we got there at the emergency room, all of her numbers were dropping. Saturation, heart rate, blood pressure. And the emergency room doctor, he said, "I'll give you guys a few minutes." And he stepped out, and we knew that meant that he didn't think Mom had long. As soon as he stepped out, everything went back up. Blood pressure, saturation, everything. And the doctor comes back in. He says, "Mr. Glenn, I don't know how to explain it, but we're going to have to admit her now." And I said, "Okay." He stepped back out, and her sister, Diane, looks at all the numbers that are going back up, and she leans into me and goes, "Michael, Jesus is having second thoughts." And if you know my mom, then that's probably not too far off. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready for this one or not." So I said, "Oh, your mom's in heaven now." I said, "No, she's not in yet. She's still at the gate telling Jesus about some of the mistakes he made and things he could have done better. She hadn't gone in yet, so it'll be a few days before she gets finished with her list of things that she wanted to bring up to him." But, when it's your mom, you're just 9 years old inside. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how old your mom is. You're just 9. And I'm dealing with this really weird feeling at 61 years old. I'm an orphan. I don't have anybody to tell me I'm handsome and smart and all that. So you lose all that. So, but the Lord has been patient and very good. And you were part of her life. And she loved being part of Kairos. And I'm very grateful for your friendship to my mom. One of my best moments was Michael Boggs one night said that I had always told the story of listening to my mom play the piano. That was the soundtrack of my life, was my mom playing the gospel hymns on the piano. And he said, so we're going to close out. So without Mom knowing it, he invited her up. Well, it took her about 2 seconds to kind of get hold of that. And Boggs leaned in and he goes, what key? And Mama says, I don't know. And one of the other members of the band said, play it, we'll catch you. And she started playing Amazing Grace, and the band kicked in behind her. And watching my mom lead these Nashville musicians was just, it was a memory I will never forget. And that was a fun night and a great story. So thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. So I was in school most of my life. I went to high school. I went to college. I got my master's degree. I got my doctor's degree. I was in school and all the time. I was reading books. I was doing papers, and I was learning how to take tests. Now notice what I said. I didn't say I was learning the material. That's a whole nother thing. I, at a very early age, figured out the only thing that really mattered was passing the test. They didn't care if you knew it. Just a couple of times a week, you had to pass a test. So I learned to pay attention to how the professor lectured, how the teacher was teaching, and listen for those key phrases that would give you some indication what would be on the test. What book did they keep referring to? That reading's going to be on the test. All the pages they gave you to read, you couldn't read all of that stuff in 10 lifetimes. Okay, 500 pages here, another 1,000 pages. Nobody could read all of that. Okay, so you learned to pay attention to what the professor was paying attention to. For instance, my Old Testament professor, Dr. Clyde Francisco at Southern Seminary, if he had his glasses on, that was lecture. That was on the test. If he took his glasses off, he was preaching now. It was good stuff, but it wasn't going to be on the test. You learn those kind of cues, right? Find out what's on the final. And when I was growing up in my little Mill Village Baptist church, we were always talking about when Jesus would come back, and we were playing Name the Antichrist. Okay, pin the tail on the Antichrist. You ever do that? Right? And we had everybody had a new person according to the 666, right? Oh, did you know if you add up his name and square it by 14 and divide it by 12, you get 666? Or did you know he was born in June 6, 06? He must be the Antichrist. So a friend of mine wrote a hilarious article one time called Antichrist I Have Known. And it was all the people who had been named as the Antichrist. We thought, because see, this was the height of the Cold War. We thought Russia was going to attack Israel over oil. I mean, we had big books that planned out the end times and what you could do and how you lived through it and all of this. You guys have never had to have the bomb drilled, have you? No. Have you had the bomb drilled? Did you have to go sit out in the hall? Okay. Nuclear attack. In case of nuclear attack, go in the hall and kneel down. The only thing we could figure out is it made you easier to sweep up at the end of the day. I got them all here. You're kneeling down in a nuclear attack. What is this? So I got pretty good at taking tests. I got pretty good at knowing what was on the final. What I hated was pop test. Those little sneaky tests that would sneak up on you when you weren't ready. When you maybe hadn't done the reading you should have done over the weekend. Maybe you should have paid attention to quite the way you should have at the lecture the day before. Pop test. Oh, the professor would say, this test just gives me a reading on how well you're doing with the material. How well I'm doing in teaching. Then how come they never flunked? Right? If you didn't pass, they didn't stay behind. You did. All my little life, we were drilled on what you will do when you die and go to heaven, right? Scared to death. 6, 7 years old, you go to church, nobody would respond to the invitation, so the preacher would start telling a story about whoever got run over by a bus when they left church. Right? Y'all heard that story? You haven't? Oh, I'll tell it later. Just hang on. So the poor guy is now in hell and all this. So you, oh, wait, when I die, I want to be able to pass that test. What would Jesus ask me? What's on that final? Da-da-da-da-da. Never realizing that most of us were flunking pop tests. Those little tests that Jesus gives you every day to see if you're paying attention, to see if you're learning the material, to see if he can trust you and trust me with more. You see, the real question isn't so much about whether or not you can trust Jesus. The real question is whether or not Jesus can trust you. So let's read the story of a man who had to take a pop test. His name is Belshazzar. You remember the story? Belshazzar, and it's told in Daniel chapter 5. I'm going to read the whole story, so listen closely. King Belshazzar held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine in their presence. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver vessels that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, wives, and concubines could drink from them. So they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and they drank from them. And they drank wine and praised their gods made of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And at that moment, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and began to write on the plaster of the king's palace wall next to the lampstand. And as the king watched the hand that was writing, his face turned pale, and his thoughts were so terrifying him that he soiled himself, and his knees knocked together. The king shouted to bring in the mediums, the Chaldeans, the diviners. And he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this inscription and gives me its interpretation will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around his neck, and have the third highest position in all of the kingdom. So the king's wise men came in, but none could read the inscription or make its interpretation known to him. Then King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face turned pale, and his nobles were bewildered. Because of the outcry of the king and his nobles, the queen came to the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't let your thoughts terrify you or your face be pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the gift of the holy gods in him. In the days of your predecessor, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, mediums, Chaldeans, and diviners. Your own predecessor, the king, did this because Daniel, the one named Belteshazzar, has found an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, intelligence, and the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. Therefore, summon Daniel, and he will give you the interpretation. When Daniel was brought to the king told him, "Are you Daniel, one of the Judean exiles that my predecessor brought from Judah? I've heard you have the spirit of the gods in you, and that insight, intelligence, and extraordinary wisdoms are found in you. Now the wise men and the mediums were brought to me to read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not give me this interpretation. However, I've heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple, a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will have the third highest position in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts and your rewards for someone else. However, I will read the inscription for the king and make the interpretation known to him. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave sovereignty, greatness, glory, and majesty to your predecessor Nebuchadnezzar. Because of the greatness he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages were terrified and fearful of Nebuchadnezzar. He killed anyone he wanted to kill, and he kept alive anybody he wanted to keep alive. He exalted anyone he wanted, and he humbled anyone he wanted. But when his heart was exalted and he became arrogant, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven away from his people. His mind was like an animal's, and he lived with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew from the sky until he acknowledged that the Most High God is ruler over human kingdoms and sets anyone he wants over them. But you, his successor, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. Instead, you've exalted yourself against the Lord of the heavens. The vessels from his house were brought to you, and you and your nobles, wives, and concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods made of silver, gold, bronze, iron, and wood, and stone, and you do not see or hear or understand. But you have not glorified the God who holds your life breath in his hands and who controls the whole course of your life. Therefore, he sent the hand, and this writing was inscribed. The writing that has been inscribed is Mene, Tekel, Parsin. The interpretation of the message. Mene means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel means you have been weighed on the balance and found deficient. Perez means your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persian. Belshazzar gave the order, and they clothed Daniel in purple, placed a gold chain around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him throughout all the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdoms at the age of 62. This is Junior's party. You know Junior, don't you? We all know a Junior. Belshazzar is Junior. He didn't do anything. He was born on third and thinks he hit a triple. Nebuchadnezzar did all the hard work. Nebuchadnezzar fought the wars. Nebuchadnezzar built the kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar defeated all the enemies. And when Nebuchadnezzar died, Belshazzar became the king. And now all of a sudden, Belshazzar thinks he's bad. So he wants to have a party, right? First thing, when dad dies, what's the first thing you do? Have a party, right? And Belshazzar gets tall. Now, I don't know if I'll ever be nominated for the Supreme Court, but if I am, there's parts I hope they don't ask about. Down south, we call somebody who drinks too much getting tall, because the more they drink, the stronger they get, the badder they get, and they want to whip somebody in the bar, right? Belshazzar is getting tall. Now, he is so tall now, he thinks he's taller than God. And to prove that, he's going to take God's vessels, the things that were used in worship, the sacred instruments that were brought from the temple in Jerusalem, and he's going to use them as party favors. He's going to pass them around the room and say, see, this is what we did. We destroyed the people, and we stole the cups and the jars from the temple, and now we're using them as wine glasses. And that's when the writing starts. Not only did he lose color in his face, do you know that when you're frightened and your body thinks it's going to have a fight, that one thing it does is it empties out your digestive tract so that if you're wounded, there'll be less chance of getting infected. So poor Belshazzar is embarrassed in front of his friends. Nobody can figure it out. It calls the wise men, calls all the experts, come in. They couldn't figure it out. They could read the words. They didn't know what they meant. They couldn't put it together. Finally, the queen has to come in. It's always the woman that saves the day, isn't it? You have somebody in your kingdom who can read this. You know who he is. Daniel tells this to Belshazzar and says, you knew this about Nebuchadnezzar. You knew who he was. You knew what had happened. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was the baddest of the bad, and God said, I'm going to show you who's bad. And Nebuchadnezzar had a mental breakdown. And he lived like an animal. He didn't bathe. He didn't cut his hair. He didn't cut his fingernails. He lived like a wild animal, and he ate grass out with the cattle, and they couldn't get him to come in. until he admitted that he was not who he said he was, that God alone was God, and that was when his sanity was restored. Belshazzar knew all of this. And didn't pass the test. You see, the test is not do you know it, head knowledge. Can you apply it in real life? Can you use it in your day-to-day living? Now look at this way. You have been weighed, counted. You've been weighed, counted, and you have been found to come up short. What does it mean? On one side of the scale, we put the glory of God. Remember, one of the words for glory is weight. Okay? You talk about the weight of glory. And scientists will talk about mass. And when you have mass, when you have enough mass, you have gravity. And what the Bible teaches when it talks about the weight of God's glory is the mass of God is the only one who's strong enough to be in the center of your universe. He's the only one strong enough, or the gravity strong enough to hold your world in its proper order. If you put anything or anybody in the center of your universe, they are not strong enough to hold it together, and your life will fly off the wheels. Okay? The weight, the gravity, you were compared to the weight of God's glory, and guess what? You came up short. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise, right? As Paul says, we have all fallen short of the glory of God. And your kingdom has been split. Does it mean it's been split half to the Medes, half to the Persians? It means it was split from Belshazzar. He flunked the test. But Belshazzar wasn't dead. This wasn't whether or not he went to heaven. This was the test now. This was the test today. Did you pass the test today? I know all of us will want to think, well, this is what I'll say to Jesus on the day that I die and I stand in front of him and I'm trying to get into heaven. This is what I'll say. Great. What did you say to him today? Okay? We believe our rabbi is alive. Tell you what that means. If you were a follower of the rabbi in the days of Peter and John and all the rest of them, you left your home and you moved in with a rabbi. You would live with a rabbi. You would do everything the way the rabbi did. You would eat the way he ate. You would eat when he ate. You would sleep the way he slept. You would dress the way he dressed. You would learn everything from being with the rabbi. That's why it's so important for you to be in prayer and be in Scripture. Not that you have 10 minutes a day of prayer, but that you orient your life to the walking with Jesus, to the being with Jesus in every moment of that day. So you can hear the conversation that he has with you. So you're close enough to hear him when he speaks in the smallest whisper. You're that close to him, and you'll understand. Because he will see if you are paying attention. Remember, God took Abraham up on a mountain with Isaac to test Abraham. To test him. You've heard the promise. But who do you think keeps the promise, Abraham? Me or Isaac? See, that's what happens. God comes to Abraham and says, listen, I'm going to give you a nation. You're going to be more people than you can count. Abraham says, great, but we don't have any kids now. How's that going to happen? I'll give you a kid. When Sarah heard that, she laughed. And so when God heard Sarah laughing, he said, when I come back, you're going to have a baby boy, and I want you to name that boy Isaac. Do you know what Isaac means? Laughter. If he'd been born in Alabama, we'd call him Smiley, you know? That's my boy. Every time Sarah called him, she would be reminded of the time that she laughed at the promise of God. And now Abraham had the promise keeper, Isaac. Isaac is the one who keeps the promise. Isaac is the one that bears the promise. Isaac. And God took him up on the mountain. He said, I want to remind you, Abraham, whether Isaac's here or not, I'll still keep my promise. It's not up to Isaac. It's up to me, the test. The Spirit drives Christ into the wilderness where he is tempted. Yeah, Satan did the tempting, but it was the Spirit that put Jesus there for the testing. What kind of Messiah will you be? Remember the story of the parables? The parables of the talents? Remember that story? Got one talent, he buried it, didn't do anything with it. 2 got 2 more, 5 got 5 more. Right? If you pay attention to that story, the guy who had 2 this time had 1 last time. The guy had 5, had 2 last time. You see, the master traveled all the time, and he would give you what you could handle in your faith. So the next time the master leaves, the one who buried the 1 wouldn't get any. The one who got 5 more. Have you ever thought the guy with 5 didn't want 5 more? You ever thought, hey, you did great. Here's 5 more. Oh, I'm good. I'm good. I got all this 5. I'm good. How can Jesus trust you tomorrow with the big things he wants to do if he can't trust you now? Jesus said, here's what's on the final. Love God with everything you are. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. What you find out is that's a triangle. You literally cannot do one without doing the other. Okay? You cannot love God without loving your neighbor. You cannot love yourself without letting God love you. And let me tell you something from my many years of experience. When you get serious about loving God, he's going to bring people to you for you to love on his behalf. Okay? He's going to say to you, I'm bringing this person into your life. They do not believe in me. They can't get me. You're going to love them until they do. They can't understand God's love until somebody loves them. Okay? And hear me. When he does that, he's going to bring you some Lulus. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. My administrative assistant says, where do you find these people? I don't know. They find me. One of my favorite guys was a guy named John. John had a scar from the corner of his mouth to the top of his ear. You know how he got the scar? He was a professional bull rider. Bull caught him, ripped his face open, went to the emergency room, got it patched back, went back, rolled the bull one more time. Why? He was behind on points. He used to drive for a heavy metal rock and roll group. He'd call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing? I'm sleeping, you idiot. What do you think I'm doing? I'm looking at the prettiest moon coming over the Rockies. I don't care. Send me a picture. I'll look at it in the morning. John got lonely in the night. He would call me. John didn't have anybody else to call. See, he couldn't go talk to the boys in the band. They weren't believers. See, did you see what happened to Belshazzar? He called some people to ask him. And let me just step out of the story just a minute. There's somebody here tonight, some of you, Jesus is trying to tell you something, and you're talking to unbelievers about what it means. Don't expect people who've never talked to God to recognize his voice or to understand his words. So if you're dealing with that, find one of these counselors at the end of the service tonight.
Because you're going to be somewhere tomorrow and you're going to sit down next to somebody and you're going to look at them and you're going to know this is somebody you're supposed to love. Do you have the spiritual capacity, the Christ presence to love that person even when they can't love you back? Pop test. Some of you will be traveling tomorrow. You get to Atlanta, they'll cancel your flight. Why? That's what they always do when you go to Atlanta. And you're going to think Delta messed up, Southwest messed up, somebody messed up. What you need to think is, my time, my day, my travel is controlled by the Lord on high. If he's holding me in Atlanta, there must be a reason. Pop test. Are you learning the material? Do you know what it means? Can you use it? Are you paying attention? The real tragedy is not that you will flunk the final. The real tragedy is that most of us will flunk all those little tests in between. When Jesus wants to teach you something, when Jesus wants to trust you a little more, a little deeper, and you flunk the pop test. Belshazzar knew, but knowing isn't enough, is it? So I pray tomorrow, when that situation happens, and you get this funny feeling and you say, that was exactly what Mike was talking about. Oh no, pop test. I pray you'll be ready. And you'll be proud of how you did. And Jesus himself will be proud of you. That happens, you know. Who do people say that I am? Well, some say you're one of the prophets, some say Jeremiah, but who do you say that I am? You are the Messiah, the Son of God, the promised one. Peter, and Jesus looks at Peter and goes, my Father told you that, didn't he? No way you could have got it on yourself. And Jesus celebrates with Peter. I pray tomorrow when he turns to you and asks that question on the spur of the moment, pop test, that he'll be just as proud of you. Let's pray together. All right, I'm going to give you about 120 seconds to think through this. First question. What is Jesus trying to teach you? What is it about being with him or being his disciple that you need to learn now? Where did you fail today that you need to confess? Where did you do well that you need to celebrate? And what is it about tomorrow that you now need to pray for? Hear the prayers of my friends. And I pray in the moment when they need you, they will find you. And in the moment you need them, they will be ready. We pray this in your name.